The temperature is nice and warm in the Boiling Point podcast studio, so come on in, get cozy, and let's enjoy the conversation. We empower leaders through thoughtful discussions to positively impact our world. Our host, Dave Vale, founder and CEO of Vision Coaching Inc., is highlighting how we can thrive in business communities. Our conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, and inspirational storytellers are shining a spotlight on empowerment. Joining Dave this week is our special guest host, Emily Roger. Let's join the conversation with Dave and Emily.
Good afternoon, Dave Vale.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good. It's been a couple of hours since we last spoke.
Yes, and probably a week or two since the last release of our of the last interview, which was really energizing, wasn't it?
Big time. Yeah. I as soon as I got off of that podcast recording, I just immediately emailed him and said, Matt, like, you need to be on more podcasts. Like, you have such a strong message to share, and the world needs more of Matt Jackson. So for those listening, if you have not listened to that episode, go back and listen to it. It was, powerful. And I got on my computer after, and even just speaking about all the creativity, I sat down on my computer and had been writing for this magazine article and just having a hard time of getting into that groove, getting into that flow. I sat down and hammered it out.
Wow.
It just came I could not, my fingers, I could not type fast enough. He definitely motivated me.
That's cool. So it just unlocks something in you, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And in speaking so much of how can we unlock that creativity,
Right.
with just in the circumstance, in the situation that we are in, even sometimes when that is in our office, or in my podcast recording closet.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and which kind of leads us to our next guest.
Yeah. Craig Estabrooks. Welcome to the Boiling Point.
Thank you for having me.
This, you came highly recommended by our mutual friend, David Stonehouse, that we needed to have you on and chat. So thank you for making time for us and for the listeners. And I don't know you. I know obviously about you, have read lots about the organization that you are a part of and now the CEO and president of. So for myself, the listeners, introduce yourself.
Okay, well, I'll try to be brief in the introduction of myself. My name is Craig Estabrooks. As mentioned, I am the president and CEO at the Port of St. John, and I'm very proudly just celebrated 11 years with the organization, which is extremely hard to believe when you say out loud, even though I've said it many times. And I just celebrated as well my first anniversary as president and CEO. So it's been I've had pretty much a full year experience in the job, and have learned a lot. And have a lot left to learn as well. I grew up in St. John, went to St. John High, studied at UMB. Then my travels took me to Halifax. I did my master's at Dalhousie, and my long and winding road after that led me back to the Port of St. John, where I started in October of 2011 for the former CEO, Jim Quinn, who is now proudly represents our region in the Senate of Canada and is still a very good, close personal friend of mine and our community.
That's now when you were kind of going through school and thinking of a career and all that kind of thing, did you imagine working for the Port of St. John? Was that something? And for people that aren't from this region, St. John, New Brunswick, so a province of New Brunswick and the city of St. John, and there's they would call it a deep water port here,
yeah,
right off the Bay of Fundy, which does a tremendous amount of business. And we want to kind of dig into that a little bit, but just curious, did you imagine, sitting on a podcast as a president and CEO of the port?
Not at all. Not even an ounce of me thought I would be doing anything. Quite frankly, I'll be really honest with you. I went to St. John High. I looked out the windows of my classrooms in high school, and I knew that St. John was a port city. I had some knowledge that, going way back, a few decades back, it was a very, very important port city. and that we still did significant cargo and that people were employed at the waterfront. I saw cruise ships when I was in high school, but beyond that, I had no idea how ports were structured or anything to do. And then my undergrad, I did political science and economics. I was a page in the provincial legislature in Fredericton, so I served coffee and water to the elected officials. That was my first foray into knowing all the government officials from different regions, and enjoyed every minute of that. I absolutely loved my time as a page in the legislature. And then my I thought about different educational pursuits in law school and others, and I decided to do my master's again in political science and international political economy at Dal. And I thought I was destined probably to go to Ottawa, maybe work for a House of Commons committee or some type of policy work in government is really what my passion was at that time. And I happened to be I just graduated from Dal, and I'd been traveling a little bit trying to figure out what was next, like many people when they conclude their studies. And I happened to be back in St. John, and a mutual friend introduced me to Rodney Weston, who was the former member of parliament for St. John from 2008 to 2015. And Rodney was looking for kind of a student fresh out of school to help him. He had just been appointed chair of the Fisheries and Oceans Committee, which I always thought was an incredibly interesting department. So that lined up kind of with my thinking as a young person out of school, policy work, government to get in. And Rodney was just a wonderful, still is to this day, a champion for St. John, and just a great person. And he said, would you like to come and do a little work for some of the things I'm doing in Ottawa? And I did that for a very short period of time. And that's when I was introduced to Jim Quinn. And Jim had just become CEO at the Port of St. John. He was fresh off of 32 years in the civil service in Ottawa, and he was looking to add a couple of new people to his team at the Port of St. John. And he pitched me an idea. He said, I have this fundamental belief that St. John's been left out of infrastructure projects, big infrastructure projects that can help propel this port forward. And it's been a long time since we've undertaken a big project. He said, would you be interested in coming to work with me in some type of government relations type role, but really more about writing a business case and building community support? This is great. I really don't know what to expect. I don't know what the port does. I have very little knowledge, but you've sold me on his energy and the notion of delivering something for the community I grew up in. I thought, I'm in for this. I didn't realize it was going to be 11 years later, and I'd be in the role. I'd be in his role eventually. But I really took a strong interest and started. And we on day one, I often joke with them that I thought I was coming in to help support a project, but there wasn't even a project. It was really just the belief that we needed to create a project. And that's come to be today. What we see on the west side of our port, we're just about to conclude in Q1 next year, $205 million modernization project. That was early day concept when I started in 2011, and we went through many years of planning and government applications, and here we are today.
That well, there you go. You did that really quickly too.
Yeah.
But it's interesting the trajectory. But there's something that I think there's a thread in there for that connects with what we do in terms of helping support developing leaders and coaching and that sort of thing. But it's interesting the impact someone like an aspiring leader can have on someone in terms of attracting you and kind of pulling you into the fold and you staying, because this region has a challenge of people leaving, particularly kind of the brain drain, if you will. And you didn't. It was something about you mentioned a member of parliament, and then Jim being people that saw potential in you, and it was enough to have you stay, and not only stay but just almost double down, right?
It's so true. I would not have done that without either of those opportunities, and it was leadership, and it was the playing at my heartstrings both times that, we can do something great together. It's kind of drawing you in on the idea and the concept as opposed to the day-to-day transactional work. That's all very important. I mean, process and work and delivering results is important, but what kept me motivated and what we try to do with our team today at the port is keep people motivated on what are we trying to accomplish, and if we're successful, what impact does that have on the community? And for us now, in the past year, it's been about the growth at the port. We have grown tremendously, even in that last construction year, on the container side. But most people that travel across the Harbor Bridge can see the growth that we've had this year. We did the metric in the container world is 20-foot equivalent, so it's a 20-foot container box. A larger one, a 40-footer that people commonly see, counts as 2 TEUs. So that's just the metric I'm going to use. But last year we did 86,000 TEUs. The high water mark in the history of the Port of St. John's about 100 in the early 1980s, and we're going to do 150,000 this year. And that's great. And if you're a port person and you love supply chain, you're really interested in that metric. But what I care about, and what I think the community is starting to understand, is that's more than double the longshore workforce on the west side. The folks that are doing the day-to-day, the tough work 24/7. These people put in the sweat equity to make all this happen. Those are really good jobs. Port cities are thriving economic engines because they create middle-class jobs across the supply chain, and really on the longshore. We've more than doubled our workforce this year across union. They call it white card list, which is the precursor to becoming full union, and then the reserve list. People are getting major hours, and these are 6-figure jobs. People that have very diverse backgrounds, grade 12 education. They do all the training. The training is extremely difficult and extremely rigorous to become a longshore member, and we've really successfully seen all that. But that transforms. Living wage in St. John, New Brunswick is just over $20. The longshore positions are $43 an hour. I mean, this will drive our economy, and it will help be part of that greater poverty puzzle that we've been looking at for many years. And that's what motivates and excites our team.
So, yeah. Emily, are you familiar with the economic engine that ports are? Like, I'm not as familiar. I'm a little bit. I know. I believe one of your counterparts in Beldoon, and some of the great stuff that's happening up there. But just peripherally. But what about you, Emily?
For me, I know the St. John port to be where cruise ships comes in. Yep. And just this past summer of learning what Area 506 is. Yeah. And being like blown away of this exists. Like I live in Fredericton, and but I had no idea, and so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I can give you a little bit of background about kind of the port structure in Canada and how we all kind of came to be. Denis Caron in Beldoon is one of 17 Canadian port authorities, along with ourselves in St. John. Denis is a tremendous person who I had a chance to work with a lot when he was with the province of New Brunswick, and he was one of the big thinking leaders in Fredericton, and I mean still is today. You see his impact across the province. He's a good friend, and so we're both CEOs of one of the 17 port authorities in Canada. Vancouver, Fraser Port being the largest on the west coast. So the way it evolved into a Canadian port authority system, there were a couple of different government agencies through the years. A lot of people will remember the National Harbors Board, which was a governing body that looked after ports in general in Canada, and then they'd have local staff from engineering, accountants, all sorts of different people on the ground that were the employers, and then the union would do the organized union would do the labor work at ports. That structure's evolved over time, and in the 1990s, when the government of the day, the Chrétien government, was looking at divesting of a lot of assets and downsizing the size of the federal government. A lot of small craft harbors and ports were sold off at the time, and the government decided to keep the ones that they deemed, this is their language from the Canada Marine Act that they created, strategically significant to Canada's trade, and that had to remain financially self-sufficient, provide a link to highway and different sorts of infrastructure, rail infrastructure as well. And St. John and Beldoon in the province of New Brunswick were maintained as Canadian port authorities. So the Canada Marine Act is a piece of legislation that governs all of the ports. And then we each have our own letters patent, which is basically the terms of reference, the legal incorporating documents that created the St. John Port Authority. So at kind of the easiest way of explaining what we are, we're a landlord on behalf of the federal government. So we have one shareholder, and it's the Minister of Transport in Ottawa, and it's Crown land that we manage on behalf. So we then lease the land or operate it for our own purposes. So for the Port Authority in St. John, we have leased land for bulk operations like potash. We've got a major container terminal that's leased out to DP World, who's a global giant that does trade and logistics around the world, headquartered in Dubai. And they operate the largest container terminal in Vancouver, in Fraser, Surrey, and also in Prince Rupert on the west coast. And we are their only terminal on the east coast of Canada. And then in the outer harbor, it's not Port Authority land, but it's within the navigable waters, because we manage the waterways as well within the geographical certification that Ottawa outlines for the Port of St. John. There is operations in liquid bulk. So Irving Oil would be the big presence. They import crude, refine it at Canada's largest oil refinery, and then ship it out. And we also have a liquefied natural gas terminal that's owned by Repsol that today is an import facility. And Repsol is obviously a Spanish energy giant, and they own and operate that terminal outside of the port land, but within our geographical certification. So we have a relationship with that liquid bulk. And then in the inner harbor, we do containers, bulk. And then finally, to Emily's point, it's my long-winded way of getting to cruise. We are Canada's 4th largest cruise port, and we handle the largest cruise ships in the world. We had the Oasis of the Seas last year, which is the biggest ship we've ever welcomed at the Port of St. John. And after 2 long years of no cruise ships, we welcomed those beautiful vessels back and had a great tourism year with that new product at the Container Village. And really, it's the genius of people like Ray Gracewood and others that pitched us the idea: how can we better use Portland to welcome cruise passengers, but then start to get locals and people from New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada interacting with those cruise passengers in the same space? Because what it replaced was a tent. We had a tent structure with a few vendors, but it was a restricted access tent that only cruise passengers could go to.
Okay. Yeah. I learned so much when I was in there on St. John history, on New Brunswick history, on fossils, on coffee. I was like, I just need to go touring cruise ports.
Yeah, and Ray Gracewood, who has launched the concert series a number of years ago, Area 506, continued the brand on. He did a great job of getting a diverse group into those containers this year. So I think, as you mentioned, we had a lot of really interesting attractions.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Jim Quinn, and I had read in Huddle how you saw, like, I think it was when you were just newly appointed to your position as CEO, that you saw Jim's leadership and how he conducted himself, and really, really felt that it was the role that you wanted to make in the community as well.
Yeah.
What role was that? What did Jim do that was just so lasting on you that you're like, I really, really, really want this?
I think it was creating a port authority that was more open and welcoming. I think that was one of Jim's key legacies that really attracted me to want to come there in the first place. Ports after 9/11 became, much like airports, a very restricted, closed area. People couldn't interact with the waterfront in the same way, and it was due to that physical security concern. Mm-hmm. And we still operate within that paradigm. But I think what Jim did such a good job on was trying to bring people back and connect with their waterfront in a more meaningful way. So just little examples: the cruise terminals, are utilized for community events. We do a lot of charitable giving at the port for key events. During the pandemic, one of our cruise terminals, the Diamond Jubilee, was a place for food banks and the 5 priority neighborhoods in St. John to be able to come down and house a lot of the food that they were given, so that they could get it to residents who were being, disproportionately hurt by the lockdowns and had a really difficult time early days in the pandemic. So I think we're hopefully, continuing that legacy. I always loved how the port, we do a lot of interaction with the private sector and the business world, and we are a center for commerce, but we get to do all this incredible stuff with the community as well. And I think it's that dual part of your brain working on each individual day that gets myself and a lot of our newer team members excited. And quite frankly, I think it's the diversity of work that attracts the people that work at our team, and why we're able to retain them so well.
As I listen to you, I'm thinking of your days as a page, and I'm guessing you're a bit of a policy wonk. As you're describing this, it's really how important is good policy around supporting what you do as a port authority and these 17 port authorities.
Yeah, no, I love that part of the job, and we have an association, Association of Canadian Port Authorities, and the CEOs form the foundation of the board, and then there's an executive that comes out of that group, and I just love talking about pan-Canadian issues as well, and then localizing them back to St. John, New Brunswick, and seeing how it can affect that. There's legislation all the time that's introduced about ports and supply chain. And one thing that's come out of the pandemic, so we all understand supply chain now. We've all had stories. I mean, my wife and I ordered a couch, and I think it took 12 weeks to get here. We all were touched by this stuff. It's hard to procure anything. There were shelves that were empty of vital goods, and we all kind of understood supply chain in a bigger way. And what I find really interesting is that the government in Ottawa today, I think, with all their work on the supply chain task force, they really did a great job engaging ports and people that care about supply chain, and how do we green the supply chain and make it more sustainable and more environmentally friendly, and how does it fit into 2030 and 2050 targets. This government has done a great job, and our local MP Wayne Long has been really great at engaging us as a port authority and getting our feedback and really listening to us and hearing us. And I love that part of the job. I've always kind of been able to take the lead on that from the time I got here, and it's something that continues today.
No lack of energy, Craig. Like, holy cow! And I'm thinking of how important that must be coming out of a pandemic. Given, you describe like cruise ships as an example, and supply chain issues, and just the how important is it, like, coming out of there, like, strong leadership? Like, I mean, what does it help support, like, tangibly, maybe, that people could grab onto? Because a lot of people, like, you drive by, you see the containers, but you really don't, or at least I don't really appreciate the way I should what actually happens there, and how that work connects to so many parts of our economy. But and as you even you bring up the Area 506, and then you talk about some of the less privileged neighborhoods that are impact. Like, there's this huge role, right, that can be played. But coming, like, and giving all those things, and given the challenges of the pandemic, what was it like leading the authority out of that?
Yeah, no, I think we're only as good as the people that we employ at the Port Authority. So it's how do we maximize everyone's individual potential, and because we are facilitators. Being at a port is all about relationship building. Sometimes we're doing direct business, like in the cruise industry. We're working directly with cruise lines and selling them on how great St. John is, because it is great. And when passengers get here, they're blown away, just like they're blown away with Halifax, Charlottetown, Atlantic Canada, St. John's, Newfoundland. We are an incredible place, and especially and we have months where we're even more incredible, and they're September and August, and that's the majority of our cruise season. So sometimes we're out selling the cruise lines, and other times we're on the container side, we're facilitating, we're bringing partners together, like CP Rail, one of the largest companies in Canada that's made St. John their East Coast connection. They purchased back a piece of rail that they had sold off decades ago in 2019, and made hundreds of millions of dollars worth of upgrades, and now they're the ones helping bring all this new cargo. DP World, international player at the container terminal, NB Southern Rail, who's a JD Irving company, is the short line, and all those pieces have to come together and work to make this story and to make this cargo flow through the Port of St. John. So that's another fun part. We get to bring everyone together and try to be that great facilitator. So it is about having good quality people who are high energy, who are proactive, who know that it's about relationships and developing bonds with your stakeholders and your community around you. So I think the leadership style that myself and the leadership team, kind of the folks that report indirectly to me, we have a lot of expectation of how we interact with stakeholders and community, and the experience that we want them to feel when they're interacting with the Port of St. John. We want them to know that we're going to go above and beyond, because you don't have to go too far back where St. John had been this great seaport many decades ago, and we did go down, and it's been a comeback story. And I think when you're a comeback story, it's, that fight or flight gets ingrained into you. Like we're not going to leave any stone unturned to make sure that there's activity here at the sport. And that's really the kind of people that we've attracted and that are coming out of the pandemic. We're very hungry.
Yeah. So you talk about, the team is only as great as all of the employees, and about maximizing everyone's potential. What are some ways as a leader that you really help maximize people's potential?
One of the new things we're testing, because we have so many high flying achievers, is we worked with Tanya Chapman here locally from the Chapman Group, and we refreshed our vision, values, and purpose. But what really came out of that strategic planning that I thought was a very interesting point is our board, at the recommendation of our team, endorsed 8 key pillars. And we can get into the detail on that, but the leadership point that I wanted to make there is, a lot of times organizations would go out and kind of, from a master planning or an asset management planning, like a port does a lot of, and a city would do a lot of, you go out and find good outside, consultants that will come in and help you write that report and deliver and help guide your organization down the path. We flipped that a little bit. It's, we're still going to get a lot of outside parties and help, but we've named eight key project managers that are going to lead those pillars into next year and beyond. And myself, our Chief Operating Officer, Andy Dixon, and Vice President of Engagement and Sustainability, Paula Copeland, myself and my 2 colleagues, we're going to be the sponsors. So we sponsor a couple of those each. And the project managers are people who are really motivated and are excited that they're going to be able to leave a mark with their name on it, right from a project charter, all your PMP principles to the end. Have a project charter, work with a local team, kind of an internal stakeholder team, and then go out and find external help as we kind of craft each of those 8 pillars through 2023. So the hope is that that'll really keep people as excited and motivated as they've been to date.
Yeah.
What I like about that is it creates ownership, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah.
And it helps, and because a lot of times strategic planning process, people would typically commonly say, it's an interesting process, and we got this document and it sits on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah.
What you're saying is, no, this is going to be living, live, and you've got typically 8 people that are tasked to leading and making their mark with your support is what I'm hearing. So it seems like a really nice engagement model.
Yeah, and that's really our hope too. And then within those 8 groups, the project managers can then tap other resources internally too. So that next layer, maybe someone who's just started in the last number of years, because we have a lot of new folks that have joined us as we've scaled our workforce up. As in the 25 to 30 range when I started, we're now 50 people. So we've had a lot of new people added, especially with the growth and through the pandemic. Gives them an opportunity to understand where we've been, where we're going, and they can start to think about what mark they want to leave on the organization as well.
Yeah, I love, and I had kind of read about this earlier, but you speaking about how you recently underwent that review of your vision and your values and your purpose. And I think of the amount of conversations that I've had with leaders, and I ask them, well, what is the organization's values? What are the company's values? What is the vision?
Yeah.
And not being able to, there's no answer there. Or it's like, is how you are operating as a leader in alignment with what that vision, those values, that purpose is. And, hearing that you then tested and challenged the language, the assumptions, and then were willing to make those changes.
Yeah, and when we started our 2-day session, so what we did was pretty unique as well. We gathered our entire team, our entire group of 45 to 50 employees, unionized workforce, non-union. We had everyone in the room. Tanya facilitated it. We did a brainstorming. We got a lot of, she asked a lot of questions, challenged, the language that we had before, and before we did the breakout session, the only thing I said to the team was, don't describe a port, describe the Port of St. John. And what I meant by that difference, we had really good language before, and kind of our vision was to connect to the world through trade and tourism, which was a really great vision. And we got quite far with that a number of years ago. It's inspirational. We connect to the world. It makes you feel like you may be sitting in St. John, New Brunswick, but you're connecting to the world. But the challenge this time, as we evolve and try to create our own unique identity and market Port of St. John to the world, that former statement could be true of any port. Any port connects to the world through trade and tourism. That's kind of, you're describing what a port does. So now we tried to evolve it and make it, describe who the Port of St. John is. And the core values exercise was really about, describing our DNA. What's our contract to you? How are we going to interact with you as a stakeholder? What can you expect from us?
And I'm guessing maybe part of that process or something that came out of it, I don't know if it's connected to that or not. And we got to talk about this is you're launching a podcast now. And I'm just going to say that wouldn't be what I would expect from this conversation. So you mentioned that just, prior to us hitting record.
Yeah.
Like tell us about that and what, the genesis of that.
Well, it actually all stems from, a sentiment that Dave, you expressed a little bit earlier. It's that we do all these little things that are very interesting, but it's very difficult to tell the story of what we do. Mm-hmm. So if someone said, give me the elevator pitch of what you do, you almost pause and go, oh, I got to talk about liquid bulk, community, cruise, government, all the policy, all this, and it becomes so overwhelming. Your elevator pitch lasts 15 minutes, and probably my answer to your first question felt like that too for all your listeners. That's going up and down the CN Tower like 4 times, Rob.
That is exactly what I was thinking, Dave.
That's a long elevator.
Yeah. So it's impossible to describe that. So what we brainstormed internally was, and we had an individual, Kate Mulberry. I don't know if you know Kate at all. She pitched us the idea of, wouldn't a podcast be a wonderful idea to get a more nuanced way, way of getting a story that takes a little bit longer from a storytelling standpoint out, and all these things you do with the community and all these interesting people you interact with. We interact with from the CEO of DP World to, Christina Fowler is the executive director of the Learning Exchange, trying to make sure that her adult learners know that there's access to potential new jobs with the ILA. So we have all this diverse, different leaders that we interact with. Wouldn't it be great to help tell our story with Kate, who's got a really unique way of delivering a message and interacting, and then try to work with others that are doing podcasts like yourself and really start to tell stories that are port related, but even deeper part of the community.
So what's the name of the podcast going to be?
It's actually going to mimic the what we had in the container village. We called it our Port Pod. Which was our, how we interpreted the history of the Port of St. John and some of the really neat things we're doing from environmental sustainability, kind of indigenous standpoint in the pod. We worked with some of the elders from the communities in kind of curating that pod this year. So we thought, we already named something the Port Pod, so we're going to call the podcast the Port Pod as well, and try to have that cross branding from the container village embedded in.
Love it. It's catchy.
Yeah. So our first episode is next week, and we're going to be talking all about harbor lights, which is something that the port's been part of. We light up the tree on Long Wharf. We've partnered with the CBC for a number of years, and it helps feed folks this time of year through I believe 16 food banks across the greater region from Sussex to St. Stephen.
It's a big initiative. Yeah. So you're one of the hosts, I assume?
Kate and I are co-hosting.
Oh, cool.
So you got me, and then you've got someone from outside the port world, and it's going to be interesting and great.
I think Craig's a natural. Emily, what do you think?
I think so. Yeah.
Kate will keep me in line.
And Kate's wonderful. What I was going to say, like what I've really enjoyed about doing podcasts, and it'll be interesting to hear your experience after you, and I mean, obviously this is a different type of a podcast and our format might be different than your format. But just, kind of touching on what Emily spoke to earlier, something about a conversation and what it can evoke in you as the host is pretty incredible. Like Emily talked about, our last interview, and then getting out of that and, kind of unlocking some some thoughts because of the topic that supported doing art. Like it's a really great way to connect with people and just, and I think, learn more like about a Port Authority, like, in a conversation. And we probably, the reality is, would we be having the same conversation somewhere else? Maybe not. You know what I mean? Like the fact that you've got a blocked set of time and you've got a topic you want to talk about, and it's really neat what it can evoke and what you can learn. You as a host as well is just something I'll share with you, having done this for a number of years.
Yeah, no, that's great. And one thing that struck me as you were speaking there too, is that so many times when organizations communicate something, you're communicating a message because it has a time and place, and it's a very specific, you're trying to target something, you're trying to get a story out. And what I love about this conversation and hopefully what we're going to do in our podcast is there is no reason for having the dialogue at that time. There's no specific time and place. You're trying to get a message out, something's topical, it's date sensitive. It's just that conversation. And I think hopefully it will enrich and people will understand kind of what we do, what our thought process is behind things, because we're not trying to communicate something to someone. We're just trying to have a casual conversation about what we do, why we care about what we do, and how we're trying to craft a future for the port and the community, and then open it up to people's thoughts, ideas, and concepts, because we don't hold all the great ideas. There's lots of ideas that we need to hear from people in the community.
Emily, what advice would you've started co-hosting this about, well, I don't know how long it's been. It feels like forever.
Actually, we actually have our 1 year anniversary of me co-hosting with you on December 16th. That was the first day I came down to St. John and
Friday.
we recorded. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a year already. Holy cow.
I know.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. So Emily started as a guest, and she's got if you don't know her backstory, we got like Greg Hemmings, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he did this. He pulled her in, and she wasn't aware she was going to be a guest, and she was a guest, and we just really enjoyed the conversation. And then this wonderful documentary came out of it with Hemmings House. And then Emily got into the coaching world, which is kind of, I have a unique interest in, and we started collaborating. And then she joined the podcast, and she's now going to be leading it. But any advice, Emily, given in the last year that you give Craig?
Gosh, I don't know of advice, but I think that allow yourself the time to, just like what happened after the last time we were recording, to have the space and the freedom to really soak in the conversation that you had, because it again, just the power of conversations, but really giving yourself that time, that space to just marinate in it.
Good advice.
Yeah.
It's difficult to do in today's world, but we need to take that time.
I did after a recording.
What?
And that our car is going through a motor vehicle inspection. So we only have one car, and my wife works at a school, and it's about a kilometer and a half away. And I forgot my daughter's basketball bag. So I had to hike down with the basketball bag in the snow. And I shouldn't be saying that because we're time dating our podcast here. To get a car, to clean it off, to race over, to give my daughter. So I didn't reflect on it at all. So I think that's excellent advice, and I'm going to start taking it. And in fact, after this, I can, I'm just thinking in the last 40 minutes how much I've learned about. I should be paying more attention to what's happening with port authorities, and I have this, like I said earlier, knowledge of it very on the periphery, and yet more. So I'm gonna take that advice and marinate on it. How can we help support what you're doing, Craig, and letting listeners learn more about you and the Port Authority and the podcast and that sort of thing?
I think there's a world, there's a port world beyond just the Port Authority too, that we're hoping to help get the word out. So we've got an incredible longshore union, for example, that puts the hours and moves the boxes in the container terminal, and they're the ones, loading the potash ships at our bulk facility. They're integral into crews. There's all these different companies that don't have a huge profile that are all adding to their workforce in a meaningful way because we're experiencing growth right now. And B Southern Rail, for example, people probably a decade ago didn't see themselves working, leaving high school and going to work on a rail line. But that's a very common thing in other parts of North America, Europe, and the world. People having very, very meaningful employment working for a rail company. Rail is a huge part of the world, but we haven't seen a lot of those jobs lately. So I think we're going to try to do as best a job as we can to tell some of those unique personal stories, not just on the podcast, but in a different way, communicating. So any help we can get to tell those stories and to make it more personal, I think that'll connect more with people when they can see themselves or their relatives or their friends, kind of the work that they do. When they can see it and feel it a little bit more, it'll be more meaningful.
So by the time this comes out, the first, you'll have launched the first podcast, if not this, so how would people find that?
The first we just recorded it Monday. So I believe it's going to be pushed out through kind of our social media platforms at the port. We also filmed it as well. So I believe that there is an ability to watch some or part of it on YouTube as well. So stay tuned. We're gonna push it out through our social media channels and beyond.
And so you're killing me here. Where do they find this, Craig? Like, give us a URL or something.
I have to get back to you on that one. That's not my
sorry.
my area. Sorry. I mean, I listen to podcasts on Apple Podcasts, so I don't know if that's. I'm sure our folks are going to be able to push that out. They're going to kill me for not having that answer. As they listen to this podcast.
We'll have it, and they'll probably. And you can kill me for pushing and not being aware of the fact that you're avoiding it because you didn't have it, which I can totally 100% relate to. Believe me.
Good.
I second that Dave could relate to that.
Oh my God, totally. So I would have been doing the exact same thing, and I would have been thinking to myself, Dave, would you just let us go? Like, obviously, I don't know.
We are going to the top of the CN Tower again, and we are still not going to get an answer to that question.
That's right. I'm just going to go back and start reiterating what ports do again.
I was like, you know what? He would be good in Ottawa, wouldn't he, Emily?
Yeah, I learned that as a page in the legislature, and then working in Ottawa. In that world, you don't answer the question you're asked. You answer the question you want to answer.
Well, 100%. And actually, and that's kind of the beauty of a podcast is it's long enough where you can still drill down. And finally, someone says, "Look, I don't have it." Okay, no problem.
You can make a joke of it. So
yeah. Or the other thing is that, like, when I'm a guest on podcasts, it's somebody asks you a question, and then you start kind of going your answer. And if you don't want to answer that question, like, you still can just go down whatever avenue you want to go. And then at the end, you're like, "Wait, what was that question again?" And normally the host has forgotten what the question is. And so you're just on to the next topic. Like, that's another tactic for you.
Well, as Dave was asking the question, I'm thinking the podcast I listened to, like, my brain immediately went to the Dateline podcast, and I'm thinking of the Keith Morrison voice on Dateline thing, and it says, listen to, enjoy the podcast on the channel that you kind of the channel of your choice. And I'm thinking my brain's not firing here because I don't know what all the channels of choice are.
So when you hear Genevieve chime in at the end, and not that Emily couldn't do this, it's exactly for the same reason that you're like, because I'm like, for whatever reason, my brain doesn't go there about where do you find us and all that kind of stuff. So but the Bowling Point is bowlingpointpodcast.com. Is that right, Genevieve? Bowlingpointpodcast.com. So I do remember that. So but people will see links on these show notes, I would expect, to your podcast.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So we, at the end of these, we do takeaways, right, Emily?
We do.
And who's going first, you or me? Because you're the lead on this.
Go for it, Dave.
Okay, I well, something I'm going to commit to is learning more about port authorities, and I'm really struck by the complexity and all the stakeholders, and how important it is to community. And what I'm curious about, and I mean, this for another conversation, but I'm curious about what happened. Like, how did the port start? What was it that caused the port to kind of take a bit of a slump? I guess is the best way. And but it's so nice to hear it come back, and it impacts all of us, not just in this region, but beyond, right? So that's for me something really interesting. And I just Craig, I really enjoy your energy as well. It's contagious because on some level, this could have been a really dull conversation, which has absolutely not been.
Good.
That's a good takeaway. Dave did not find this dull.
Yeah,
Not at all. And I didn't anticipate it to, but I was just thinking, I don't know anything about this topic, and I'm like, how? And if you don't have an engaged person on the other end, I mean, it could be kind of like, right, we're done.
I could have launched in a container is a box. It moves on the. I could have gone very technical. We could do the alternative podcast now.
I know. Yeah. Please don't do that. Please
I
don't.
would like that just to hear Dave's reaction of how he
like where do we go with this? Like, oh man. Although some, oddly, I find some like even those things interesting. So but I really appreciate the energy you bring to this, and as as a member of this community, I just so glad to see someone like yourself taking on the role. So there are multiple takeaways, Emily.
So good.
Over to you.
That was a great takeaway. Yeah. And, to add to that was like around your energy is, you talk about maximizing someone's potential, and that your potential was maximized. It sounds like by a passionate leader that like brought you in, and that you kind of like stayed sucked in that passion. And now your passion is being passed on to help maximize the potentials in others, and just how important and how integral that is. Yeah,
no, it's right. And the other thing I'd have to say too is, Jim and other leaders in the organization, something that we've really attempted to keep going is that, the really strong fundamental belief that training, coaching, leadership training is so key. And we spend, a good portion of our salaries and benefits budget on making sure that the people in our organization have access to good programming, and that we continue to allow people to grow in their personal journey. And we're not worried about training someone really well and having them, go flourish elsewhere. We just view it's another port ambassador that's out and that's going to champion ourselves. And we just view training as core to the individual and to the organization.
Awesome attitude. So
beautiful. Yeah.
Craig, you're going to appreciate this. So Genevieve, you're going to.
Yeah. Well, I'll even help Craig out a little bit, because I think what Craig was going for was to be able to say that they're going to find it on sjport.com and across their social media channels, which are linked right from their website on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and they'll probably find that podcast on their favorite podcast channels, just like our podcast. And we can be found at boilingpointpodcast.com. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. We release our video versions so everybody can see our smiling faces on YouTube and Facebook. And of course, you can listen on your favorite podcast channel.
I knew she was going to come in and
nailed it.
I knew it.
How was that, Craig? That's your takeaway? Is have someone or have that recorded or something?
Get a Genevieve.
I'll never forget that. This will always be ingrained in my mind of how to get the message out to deliver the podcast. Well, then hopefully Kate will forgive me.
Yeah, of course she will. You're way ahead of me. If you can remember all that, God love you. You'll be, uber successful. Thanks, Craig. Really appreciate it. It's been
so much.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks so much, guys.
Till next time.
Thanks for listening to the Boiling Point Podcast. Remember to subscribe and rate our podcast on your favorite listening platform. To find out more, head to our website at boilingpointpodcast.com. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. To find out more about Dave Vale's work, head over to visioncoachinginc.com. Thanks for listening, and make sure to check out our next conversation.